What is the pattern for glaciers? Well, in places, say, towards the interior of Antarctica, by some definitions that actually qualifies as a desert. Oh, there's water all over the place. Yeah, but it's been sitting there for quite some time. The amount of snow falling in any one year is quite small, and so by amount of precipitation per year, it qualifies as a desert. But what does precipitate can just sit there as ice excuse me, on the surface and stays there. Yeah, there's a little bit of evaporation happening, but overall it just sits there, and so that's why we've got ice all around in a place where there's hardly any snow falling in any one year. That place gets warmer, we're likely to see more snow and actually have that glacier grow some. But in a place where the glacier's already right at the maximum temperature, it's starting to melt around the edges. If that gets warmer, we're going to see more melting. And so, for example, basically all the glaciers near the equator on mountaintops are melting. A lot of the ones in mountains, even in mid-latitudes and into high latitudes, are also showing melting. It's only the ones that are well below freezing anyway that are showing any growth. So it does depend where you're looking as to what pattern you will see with the glaciers. Now, it is quite easy to find. Just look online. Folks claiming that actually global warming is not a problem. Well, one challenge there is that there are actually many different claims. And so you need to check just what somebody is claiming in order to sort out what might be legitimate, what not, in what they're saying. So, for example, some people just say, oh no, it's not happening, it's all some conspiracy or something. It's kind of hard to argue with a thermometer. I'm sure people would be willing to do it, but not very productive. So, yes, it is clear that we are seeing temperatures getting warmer on average for the globe as a whole. Another claim is that's happening, but it's just a natural pattern, so we shouldn't worry about it. Well, two major problems with that. One, no, it is not a natural pattern. We can tell that pretty clearly. Yes, there are lots and lots of factors that affect climate and nature, and we can study them and see what's the sun doing. Is that tending to make it warmer or colder? What's happening with clouds? What effect does that have? All sorts of different things we can look at, and none of the natural factors we can find match the current pattern of warming. But the warming pattern that we see very closely matches all the extra carbon dioxide that people have been putting into the atmosphere by burning fossil fuels over the past few centuries. Another problem with that is, oh, it's just natural, so we shouldn't care. There's a hurricane coming. Oh, it's natural, we'll just hang out here and drown. It's natural. Probably not too many people are going to think that's a real good plan. Even if something's natural, if it's causing problems, we tend to want to change that. And certainly, if nature's already pushing in a direction that's causing some problems, if we're doing anything that adds to it, that's not such a good idea. So saying it's natural is not a good argument for then claiming that therefore we shouldn't be doing anything. A different type of claim is to say that, oh yeah, it's happening, but it's a good thing. I'm cold. Global warming sounds good. Or plants use carbon dioxide. Isn't putting more of it out there good for plants? Now, in reality, almost any change, you've got winners and losers. And so, yes, there are some things that can potentially benefit, but also some that are harmed. And so, what we really need to do is to try to limit or avoid the harm. Well, if we can get things that are beneficial to work, okay, there's some potential in that. Not surprisingly, the bigger the change, the more bad and the less potential for any good things. More specifically, being warmer. Well, if you're feeling too cold, that might sound good. Around January, maybe a little warming sounds good for us in Boiling Springs. In August, it doesn't. And, of course, there are parts of the world that have different factors. So, for example, areas near the equator, well, those are already warm to begin with. Making warmer tends to cause more harm. In fact, there's been studies suggesting that countries near the equator have generally experienced negative impact by the warming that we've already had, while ones more in the mid-latitudes and higher latitudes have gained by the longer growing seasons, things like that. So different parts of the world have been unequally impacted by what's happened so far already. Even if you live in someplace cold, well, if you're used to there being lots of ice and depend on that, and now there isn't, that warming's not good for you. A lot of impacts like that on, say, Inuit, other native communities living in Arctic areas, as well as the other living things besides the people. How about those plants? Aren't they happy with more carbon dioxide? Well, some of them are. Poison ivy likes it. But others don't. More carbon dioxide, yes, that's more that the plants can use, but also making it warmer. Higher temperatures leads to essentially oxygen gunking up photosynthesis and making it not work. Photorespiration is a technical term, but basic idea, when things get too warm, plants start to have some major problems in having photosynthesis work properly. So just more carbon dioxide is not automatically going to be better for the plants. Enough? That's good. Too much? Bad. There's a balance. After all, Earth as a whole, if you had no carbon dioxide, no greenhouse effect, it'd be well below freezing for the average global temperature. Not real nice for life in general. If we have too much, then it gets too hot. It's having the right balance. Just saying, hey, plants use carbon dioxide, so it must be fine. No. Yeah, carbon dioxide is not a poison the way that some of the other things made by burning are, such as carbon monoxide or sulfur oxides, nitrogen oxides. But it's not oxygen. If you go into a room full of carbon dioxide and hang out there, you'll die because it's not oxygen. You can't breathe it. And of course, it does have the temperature effects. Too much carbon dioxide in your blood throws off your pH. There are negative effects associated with it, even though it's not particularly toxic. A different sort of claim is, where's your faith? Don't you believe that God's in charge? Well, yeah, God is in charge, but if you've paid any attention to what you've experienced in life, or any attention to history, you see that God believes quite a bit in making us learn from our mistakes, rather than jumping in so that nothing ever affects us. So the claim that if you really have faith, you will assume that God will jump in and clean up our messes for us. No, that is not good theology. That's basically what Satan said for jump off the temple. Satan is not a good individual to rely on for good theology. Again, no, the science quite clearly says we are causing the warming trend globally for the average, and it is causing various problems. A lot of these claims, track back, turn out to be from now into the billions of dollars that companies selling fossil fuels have spent on misleading advertising. Now, there's same companies that advertising companies that brought you the message that cigarette smoking was safe, and those sorts of things are the ones telling us that global warming is not a problem. Now, if they spend all that money on improving their efficiency and investing in newer technology to make things better, the whole world will be in a lot better shape. It's not even good economic policy for them, much less good for anybody else taking that approach. Now, it's true, there are a number of uncertainties. We don't know just how bad things are likely to get in the future. For one thing, how quickly or slowly do people actually bother trying to do anything about it? So there are a number of things where science can't tell us exactly. And also, okay, science says here's our pattern, and these are some problems associated with it. So what should we do? Should? That's not a science word. We're getting to ethics. We need other guidelines from religion, things like that, to help us decide there. Also, you've got areas, say, like economics. We do want to find ways that will try to minimize negative economic effects on people. But if you're dead or your home's destroyed, that's a pretty bad negative economic effect too. There are negative economic effects associated with these changes that we need to be considering, not just my company's profit margin will be smaller if I bother taking care of the environment. Lots of different models have been used. These are quite complicated using supercomputers, and there's some variation, but the basic pattern is agreed on. Here's a summary. We see, yeah, there's a range here, and we'd be a whole lot worse off if things were up here than down there. But all of them are going up. And there's a lot of broad agreement here. There's been a lot of major efforts to figure this out. The UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change played a big role and still is important for putting this information together. Long-term head of that, John Houghton, an evangelical Christian. He's rotated off from leading it, but we do have some significant religious input to this process in trying to understand what's going on with the climate change. Okay, so we're seeing things get warmer. So what? What type of impacts will this have? Living things, whether it's out in the wild, or the ones that we grow and depend on for agriculture. As climate changes, what used to grow well in one place will tend to not like those conditions so well. Maybe do better someplace else. Maybe there's not any place that they really do so well in. So these changes shift what does well in what part of the world. Not too surprisingly, the bigger the change, the more problems, the more bad effects out of it. Some examples from agriculture. Wisconsin, what agricultural products do you tend to associate with there? Well, Green Bay Packer fans wear cheese hats. Wisconsin bills itself as America's dairy land. Wisconsin puts out a lot of milk. Now, yeah, there are cows around here. Some milk production, but to really make lots of milk, like cousins that contribute quite a lot to the mozzarella on your pizzas, living up in Wisconsin, somewhat cooler climates are better. As we see warming, those zones good for dairy, whether it's Wisconsin cheese or Ben Jerry's ice cream in Vermont, that's moving more into Canada. Same true for maple syrup. We can plant a sugar maple here on campus, it'll grow, but unless it's got an extended cold time of the winter, which we do not get here, then you don't get the pattern of storing all that sugary sap down into the roots and then bringing it up as you move into spring. Not as strong a pattern, and so you can't tap it and get the sap to boil down to syrup. Again, currently, that's across the northern tier of the US into Canada. As things warm, that's shifting into Canada. Actually, there are already some issues with illegal stuff going on with maple syrup. Other life, you also have issues of things that can carry disease. For example, mosquitoes. A lot of the disease-carrying mosquitoes are found in tropical areas, don't do so well where it gets colder. As things stay somewhat warmer, those mosquitoes can spread. And so we're seeing various diseases showing up, say in South Florida on occasion. Getting higher up the mountains in Africa, places that used to not have problems with malaria are now seeing malaria as things get warmer and the malaria mosquitoes move up the mountains. So we see changes, expansion in places where tropical diseases can occur. We've talked about this a lot already, but again, carbon dioxide dissolving in water makes it acidic. Not nearly as strong as, say, sulfur oxide and nitrogen oxides, but does make it somewhat acidic. As oceans get more acidic, and for that matter, lakes and rivers, increasingly a challenge for the stuff living in them. Whether it's directly being killed by the effect, or more subtle impacts. After all, living in the water, you're affected by this. How well organisms can smell and taste and things like that. And that's not just, are they enjoying their food? That's, do they notice that there's a predator coming? Or do they pick up on the chemical signals that should be telling them where to find a mate, where their young are, things like that. These can be impacted by the pH changes. And as things get warmer, we're seeing rising sea level and more problems with flooding. Of course, we talked about this some already in talking about coastal areas and erosion. But melting glaciers, less water on the land, more in the ocean. Warmer water expands. Yeah, it gets weird down right near freezing, but apart from that, as your water gets warmer, it expands. And so we're making the ocean somewhat bigger. That's going to flood more land. Okay, so somebody's beach house gets underwater. That doesn't seem like too bad a thing necessarily, because you kind of think of people with beach houses as having other houses elsewhere too. But in many parts of the world, we have people living right near sea level who do not have other homes. Probably the worst case area is Bangladesh. Extreme high population density, very poor, so folks do not have resources to fall back on if anything disrupts them. And rising sea level, not very much, makes Bangladesh a whole lot smaller than it is today. Even today, when you get, say, a cyclone or a tsunami or something like that, lots of people are impacted because they're living so close to sea level already. Flooding, not only are all the people who lived here without a home, but now our cyclones and tsunamis and things like that are much closer in and better able to flood further up.